Chapter 19, Independence. We spend our years in a tale that is told, said King David in the Bible, as I reviewed 10 years of our lives in New Switzerland. I described in my journal those words came back to me. Though I felt sad to see time passing away, my sons past their boyhood, my wife, and me growing older, I could thank God. My sons were now healthy, self-reliant young men. I need not detail every hunt, excursion, awkward invention, or new plant we discovered in those 10 years. This is a family history, not an encyclopedia. Before I conclude my tale, however, I should tell how New Switzerland evolved under our management. Rockburg and Falconhurst continued to be our winter and summer quarters. Rockburg became green and lush as the aqueduct fed our orchards, plantations, and decorative vines. We diverted water to transform the swamp to a lake, with plenty of marsh around the edges for the waterfowl. Black swans, white geese, and brightly colored ducks swam in harmony with sultan fowls, red flamingos, great herons, and blue-gray cranes. To Jack's delight, the giant frogs eventually grew as large as small rabbits. The palms on Shark Island grew tall and graceful. The flagstaff and cannon guarded Safety Bay. The rabbits on Whale Island kept us well supplied with food and soft fur. The farm at Woodlands flourished, as did our flocks and herds. We had all the food we could wish, even with our 4 athletic growing boys. My sons always loved to name animals. They had a beautiful creamy white cow called Blanche, and a bull with a tremendous voice. They named him Stinter. 2 fast young onagers were named Arrow and Dart. Jack gave the name Coco to the descendants of his favorite fangs. Ernst chose the name Flora for one of Fawn's puppies. Elizabeth had a few slight fevers and the boys had a few accidents, but in general we enjoyed fine health. They were all handsome fellows. Fritz was now 24, was a moderate height, uncommonly strong, active, and high-spirited. Ernst, 2 years younger, was tall, slight, calm, and studious. My brilliant second son had long overcome his youthful laziness and selfishness. At 20, Jack looked like a lankier version of Fritz. With tremendous grace and agility, he was unquestionably the family joker. Franz, a lively, handsome youth of 17, was like a mixture of all his brothers. All were honorable, God-fearing young men, loyal and kind to their parents and each other. I had always believed we would one day rejoin civilization, but the years had brought our sons to manhood, carried their parents toward old age. I worried over my son's fate when I was gone, but I shared these thoughts only with the Almighty Father, my eternal source of hope and strength. As they matured, my sons increasingly went off without telling us, but their return always made me too happy to rebuke them. One evening at Rockburg, no one had seen Fritz all day and his kayak was gone. We figured he was still at sea, and I was anxious to have him back by nightfall. Ernst, Jack, and I went off to Shark Island to keep watch from the tower. Ernst raised the flag, Jack loaded the cannon, and we gazed across the water well into sunset. Finally, we could make out a small black speck in the distance. I trained the telescope and saw that it was our wanderer sailing more slowly than usual. On my command, Jack fired the cannon to let him know we saw him, and we hurried back to welcome him at the harbor. As he drew near, we could see that the kayak was heavily laden and towing a large sack. "Welcome, Fritz," I cried. "Welcome back, wherever you come from and whatever you bring. You seem to have quite a cargo there." "Yes, I found some things we will want to investigate," he answered. "Ernst, Jack, help me carry these things up, and I'll tell you all about it afterwards." This done, we gathered on the porch to hear the story. "I'm sorry for being inconsiderate, Father. I should have told you where I was going," he began. "Ever since I got the kayak, I've wanted to explore the coast past where I killed the walrus. I prepared beforehand so I could leave as soon as the weather was good. When the perfect morning came, I headed out to sea. As I passed the spot where our ship was wrecked, the water was very clear, and I could see the guns and other ironwork on the sea bottom. Moving on, I passed among rugged cliffs and rock outcroppings full of seabirds. On the low ridges I saw seals, sea bears, and walruses swimming and lazing around. After all the rocks and cliffs, I came to a high cape running far out to sea. On the side of this rocky wall was a magnificent archway, like the entrance to a vast vaulted cavern. I decided to paddle in. The walls were covered with little swallows and their nests built on curious little platforms. These looked strange, more like sponges than birds' nests. I brought some of them home to show you. If we traded with the Chinese, I said, looking at the nest he produced, we'd be wealthy. This bird is called the esculent swallow, and the nests are considered a great delicacy in China. Fresh ones are worth their weight in silver. Elizabeth, perhaps you might try cooking some. I can't say I'd find them very appealing, she answered, but I don't mind trying. I don't have much experience boiling birds' nests. I hope I don't get any feathers in my soup, laughed Jack. After getting the nest, continued Fritz, I paddled on through. It was like a large tunnel opening into a lonely bay with very calm waters, nearly landlocked. A river mouth fed it, and beyond was the thicket of cedar. Here, too, the water was wonderfully clear. I could look down and see clusters of oysters attached to the rocks and each other. These were bigger than our safety bay variety, so I fished some out and put them on the sand. I went back for another load, and when I returned, the shells were all wide open. Must have been the sun. I wanted to try them and started poking around with my knife. In the process, I found these. Fritz took out a small box containing a number of shiny, glassy balls colored nearly white. Pearls, cheered his brothers. Treasure indeed, I exclaimed. Obviously, we have no way to spend them, but if we ever rejoin the civilized world, they'll be of great value. We should return for more the first chance we get. After I'd had some lunch, Fritz went on, I kept going. The bag slowed me down somewhat, but I reached the other side of the bay. There I found a small channel dotted with rocks and sandbars leading to the open sea. Other than that, Pearl Bay, as I named it, is completely sheltered. The tide was stirring up the water, so I chose not to risk the exit. I explored to see if there was another vaulted archway I could paddle through. I didn't find one, but I did find thousands of seabirds, gulls, sea swallows, and huge albatrosses. I was evidently trespassing because they started diving at me, screaming and wheeling over my head. Finally, I lost patience and started swinging the boat hook. After I stunned one of the albatrosses, the rest left me alone. By this time, the tide had calmed, so I made another try at the channel. Once in the open sea, I set my course for home. What a joy to see our flag flying and to hear your welcoming salute. We all praised his discoveries, and after evening devotions, we went to bed. The next morning, Fritz took me aside and confided something truly remarkable. Father, I left out a detail, he said. Perhaps you wondered why I didn't bring the albatross back. But when I pulled it into the kayak, I found a piece of rag tied around one of its legs. The bird surely hadn't tied it there, so I untied it for a closer look. I was stunned to see English words written on it, "Save an unfortunate Englishwoman from the smoking rock." For a moment, I doubted my sanity. Could there really be another human being in this lonely region? I recovered my senses when the bird started to stir. I tore off a strip of my handkerchief and wrote, "Don't worry, help is near," on it, and then I carefully tied around one leg, replacing the rag on the other. Then I did my best to revive the albatross. After a few moments, it drank a little water and flew away westward. Now, Father, I can only think about one thing. Will this Englishwoman ever get my note? Will I ever be able to find and save her? My dear son, I began, you were wise to confide this only to me. Until we know more, we mustn't unsettle the others with it, for we can't know when or where the note was written. A castaway might have pinned them on some distant shore and might have perished alone. The only sort of smoking rock I can imagine would be a volcano, and there are none here. I have more hope, Father, answered my son. The rag didn't look old. Perhaps smoke can rise from a rock without a volcano. I believe I can find and help this woman. Then let's come up with a sensible plan of action, I advised. I want to go looking for her in the kayak, he said. Ah, I replied, but if you found her, where would you carry her? Your kayak only seats one. My son thought for a moment. I'd have to modify it to hold two, he said. I nodded. I must devise a cover for the second opening to maintain safety. I'll also have to be able to carry enough supplies for a long trip. What an annoying delay. A good plan, son. We'll work on it. For now, let's go back to the house and see what's happening. We returned to find the boys busily opening the oysters, always excited whenever they found a pearl. Father, can we establish a pearl fishery at Pearl Bay? They asked. We could build a hut. It would be great fun. Good idea, I replied. Start getting ready. You know what we need. Fritz smiled at me, for Pearl Bay was such a fine departure point for his search, and the general preparation would camouflage his work from curiosity. As our departure day neared, I realized it was time for an important statement. I waited until everyone was present and then asked for quiet so that I could make an announcement. My dear wife, I've been thinking. Our oldest son is mature enough now to make his own decisions. Therefore, Fritz, from this day forward, you shall be the judge of when and where it's safe for you to go without fear of alarming us if you stay away longer than we expect. I have complete confidence in your good judgment, and I know that you will never cause us needless anxiety. Though I had a hidden motive, all my words were sincere, and I was as proud as any father in history. Fritz reached out to shake my hand, man to man, a grateful light in his eyes. His mother embraced him affectionately and said emotionally, God bless and preserve you, my boy. I decided we needed some raking and scraping machines in order to collect oysters. This delay also gave Fritz plenty of time to modify his kayak. His brothers assumed that the second seat was for one of them, a notion he didn't refute. They spent the time making tools and packing supplies, patiently accepting the delay. At last came the day. Franz stayed behind with his mother. We took some of the dogs aboard the pinnace. Fritz took his constant companion, the eagle Pounce. When Jack proudly in the kayak's second seat, he and Fritz led the way. We passed safely along the familiar coastal sights until we rounded a long ridge of rock that jutted out from the coast. In the distance, we saw the grand cliffs and a headland running far out to sea. Soon we saw the majestic archway leading to Pearl Bay. The pillars, arches, and pinnacles of this noble entrance reminded me of a fine place of worship, and I proposed to name it Cape Cathedral. As we entered, a cloud of little swallows stirred from their nests. We took time for Fritz and Jack to climb the walls and collect a few empty nests, and then resumed our voyage. We emerged into the dazzling sunshine onto the calm expanse of Pearl Bay. When our eyes got used to the light, we saw that Fritz hadn't exaggerated its beauty. It was studded with romantic islets and surrounded by fertile meadows and shady groves. Fritz pointed out the oyster beds, and we spent some time cruising in search of a good campsite. This we found near the mouth of the stream he had described, so we landed and built a watch fire just in time to see a marvelous sunset. I decided we should spend the night on the pinnace, anchored within gunshot of land. The dogs and Coco we left ashore. Whatever animals might live nearby, I doubted any of them would swim to attack us. If they did, I could expect a lively warning from our little ape Mercury, who had inherited Nip's role after the latter passed away. Night passed with no trouble. We awoke at daybreak for a quick breakfast before going to work at the oyster beds. After several days of diligent effort, we had collected a box full of pearls and built up an immense pile of shells on the beach. Each afternoon we went hunting. Between the hunts and the generous supplies of oysters, we ate well. On the last day of our fishery, we started hunting earlier than usual, intending to explore the nearby woods. Ernst set off first with Flora, with Jack and Coco following. Fritz and I meant to follow when we finished loading up the last of our tools. Suddenly we heard a shot, a loud cry of pain or fear, and then another shot. The other two dogs rushed in that direction. Fritz released his eagle, seized his weapons, and darted after them. Before I could reach the scene, I heard more shots, and then I heard a shout of victory. Before long, I saw my sons returning through the trees. Jack hobbled along like a cripple supported by his brothers, moaning and groaning. He felt his ribs gingerly, as if expecting to find them broken. I'm pounding like a half-crushed peppercorn, he lamented. I examined him and found nothing worse than severe bruises. Who or what beat you up? I asked. It was a huge wild boar, said Ernst, with fierce eyes, monstrous tusks, and a snout as broad as my hand. We took Jack down to the pinnace, bathed his bruises, and gave him a cool drink. He soon went to sleep where I left him and returned ashore. Now, Ernst, I said, tell me more. Flora and I were walking along, he replied. Then suddenly there was a nearby rustling and snorting. A great boar broke through the bushes, making for the outskirts of the wood. Flora gave chase and brought the boar to bay. Then up came Jack with Coco, and the gallant little jackal attacked the monster in the rear. The boar knocked Coco over and sent him sprawling and yelping. Jack lost his temper and fired too quickly, I'm afraid. He missed. He did get the boar's attention with the shot, and it took out after him. I shot the monster, but my bullet didn't seem to do much. Jack stumbled and fell over a tree root just as the boar caught up. Help, I'm going to die, he shouted. Happily, all the dogs showed up and tackled the boar. Otherwise, I suspect Jack's prediction would have come true. Even so, he got mauled and trampled pretty badly. I was waiting for a chance to fire without risking hitting Jack when Pounce came diving in on the boar. At that point, Fritz came up and shot it dead with a pistol. It was now late. We had dinner, then built up the watchfire and slept peacefully aboard the pinnace. Early next morning we visited the field of battle. The wild boar proved much larger than I'd imagined, and I gave thanks again to God for the brave dogs that had saved my son. The boys began to butcher out the kill. We carried the mighty hams and monstrous head back to the beach with much effort and strain. As soon as the dogs were released, they rushed back to the woods to feast on the remains of the boar. No one has more right, that's for sure, said Jack, still sore. Fritz had hoped to begin his solitary expedition that day, but his work postponed the journey. Late that evening we were getting ready to board the pinnace for sleep when a deep, fearful, blood-curdling sound echoed through the woods. We strained to listen, hoping it wouldn't be repeated, but the dread voice gave another roar, this time nearer. Worse yet, a second roar answered. We'd better find out who's giving this evening concert, answered Fritz, springing to his feet and grabbing his rifle. Build up the fire, then get aboard the pinnace and load all the guns. I'm going off in the kayak to have a look. Even as I found myself obeying the orders, I reflected briefly on my lack of hesitation. Fritz would always be my son, but he was now truly a man. Whatever became of Elizabeth and me, my sons would be just fine. I thought as I piled branches on the fire. We kept watch from the pinnace, bristling with loaded guns. Soon our whole pack of dogs, Coco, the jackal, and Mercury came galloping back at full speed. Poor little Mercury was most frightened to find us gone. He chattered his teeth in terror and looked forlornly at the water. The dogs planted themselves by the fire, gazing landward with ears erect, occasionally barking and howling a challenge. The horrid roars grew nearer. Probably a couple of leopards or panthers scented the boar's carcass, I hoped aloud. I was wrong in the extreme. Soon a large, powerful animal sprang from the underbrush and bounded towards the fire. It was a lion, one much larger than any I had ever seen exhibited in Europe. The dogs slunk behind the fire. Mercury shrieked and ascended a tree. The lion sat almost like a house cat on his hind legs, eyes alternating between the dogs and the great boar hams hanging nearby. His tail twitched in irritation. He got up and started pacing, giving a series of short, angry roars. I expected him to spring at any moment. When he noticed our boat, he crouched on the water's edge as if to leap at us. We had maneuvered it far enough away that I doubted he could reach us, but near enough to give the dogs gunfire support. My sons held fire, awaiting my command. While I tried to decide whether to open fire or retreat. The sharp crack of rifle rang through the darkness. "Fritz!" exclaimed everyone. The lion sprang to his feet with a fearful roar, and then stood stock still. He tottered, sank to his knees, and rolled over motionless in the sand. "We're saved!" I cried. "What a shot! Right in the heart! Row for shore, boys, but stay aboard. I must join my brave Fritz." The dogs were glad to see me, but they continued to whine uneasily and look toward the woods. This seemed good advice, so I kept careful watch along with them. Seeing nothing of Fritz, I lingered by the boat. Suddenly, a lioness bounded from the shadows into the firelight. She paused at the blaze as though startled, then padded around the edge of the lighted area and roared. When she came to her mate's body, she touched him with her forepaw, sniffed, and licked his bleeding wound. After a moment, she raised her head, gnashed her teeth, and gave forth the most dreadful sound I have ever heard. A mingled roar and howl of grief, rage, and revenge, all in one. Crack! I saw a wound open on the lioness's right forepaw. I raised my gun, and the dogs gathered courage and charged. My shot wounded the lioness again, but not mortally, and the battle was on. I reloaded, but couldn't get a chance to shoot without endangering our dogs. In the black night, the fire shed an unnatural light on the dead lion and his wounded mate. The cries, roars, and groans of anguish and fury were enough to try the steadiest nerves. The dogs circled, snarling and snapping at the lion. Old Juno had led the pack to battle. After a time, I saw her change her plan of attack and spring at the lioness's throat. The great cat raised her left paw and struck. The cruel claws laid Juno wide open. The brave, loyal companion of so many years flew across the sand, mercifully stunned. In addition to her mortal wound, she would know no more pain. Fritz then appeared from the trees, saw his opening, and fired. The lioness weakened, and I took 2 steps forward and shot. Soon the great cat grew feeble, and I dispatched her with a hunting knife deep in the chest. We called Ernst and Jack from the pinnace to see the results. Their joy at seeing us safe was matched only by their grief at the loss of faithful Juno. It was now quite late, and we fed the fire. In the renewed light, we solemnly retrieved Juno's body and washed it in the stream. Wrapping her in canvas, we loaded her aboard the pinnace for a burial at Rockburg the following day. Wearied and sorrowful, but grateful to God for our personal safety, we brought all the dogs aboard and went to sleep. The next morning, before sailing for home, we landed to take the magnificent lion skins. 2 hours later, we left the flayed remains of them to the mercies of vultures and other scavengers. Homeward bound, sang out the boys as they cheerily weighed anchor. Jack didn't complain, but I could see soreness in his stiff movements. "You must pilot us through the channel and the reef, Fritz," I said. In a lower tone I added, "and then it'll be farewell, my son." "Yes, dear father, and farewell to you," he answered, a light in his eyes. He threw a cushion and a fur cloak into his kayak where Jack had ridden before. "Thanks, Fritz," exclaimed Jack, "but I think I'll let father and Ernst carry my battered bones in the pinnace. Very considerate of you, though," he finished, assuming that his brother expected him to ride back in the kayak. "Good plan," laughed Fritz as he boarded the kayak and paddled for the open sea. We followed carefully and soon paddled past the reef, after which the boys got busy setting the sails for a homeward course. Fritz waved to me, turned in the other direction, and quickly vanished beyond the point. In my mind I named the point of land Cape Farewell. When his brothers noticed his absence, I explained. He wanted to go exploring, and said he might stay away for a few days if he found it interesting. No one suspected that there was more to the story. Toward evening we sailed into Safety Bay.